Hello, real world practitioners. This is Ali Nissan. This is part 4 of our Bonded Endodontics series. In the part 1 through 3, we discussed the evolution of sealer technology from the original ZOE and resin-based sealers that had deficiencies in material properties that led Dr. Louis Grossman, a father of endodontics, to conclude that the material properties are inadequate. And this led to the conclusion that sealers have to be minimized. So the sealer interface minimization has been a leading theory in endodontic obturation over the past 50 years that has resulted into the addition of thermoplasticizing of gutta percha, of vertical condensation, and of lateral condensation. And this has been the main obturation theory in endodontics, which has been based on this particular deficiency of sealers. And then in the part 3, we described how bioceramics have now become available, and this changes the game of endodontic obturation by now moving away from having to do mechanical condensation to having bonded endodontics. So we decided, after talking about BC Sealer, to talk about the material properties of this sealer. And here you can see the chemical reaction that happens during the hydration reaction and precipitation reaction of bioceramics, in particular this BC Sealer. So BC Sealer is a calcium silicate and a calcium phosphate type of cement. And during the hydration reaction, as you express this material, which is suspended in a hydrogel but does not set until it's expressed out and it's exposed to free water molecules in its surrounding, it first goes through a hydration reaction in which the calcium silicate component, as you can see in the upper left side, of BC Sealer picks up water molecules from its surrounding. In case of endodentin, it'll pick it up from dental tubules, even if you dry it, or even if you desiccate it, because there's still water molecules around. These free water molecules are going to be absorbed, and then it's going to release calcium hydroxide. So the calcium hydroxide component of this sealer shows that this sealer is going to be very antibacterial. And it is true because the material is basic, and the pH of the bioceramic sealer during the setting time is at 12.8. So, well, we know that all the oral pathogens are basically dead at the pH of 11 and above, so having this pH of 12.8 is really advantageous. And we'll talk about the research that already proves and shows this later on in future tutorials. But right by looking at this reaction, you can see immediately that this material requires water, which means that this material is hydrophilic. And the hydrophilic nature of this material is really a remarkable feat, because up until now we've never had a hydrophilic sealer. And a hydrophilic sealer really does go a long way, because we're using it in human beings that are 75% water, and in endodentin itself, which is 10% water. So the calcium hydroxide intermediary product of this sealer is then slowly absorbed with the calcium phosphate component of it, as you can see in the bottom below in the precipitation reaction. And this precipitation reaction between calcium hydroxide and the calcium phosphate results into the production of a familiar molecule called hydroxyapatite on the lower right, and water. So the fact that you end up with hydroxyapatite in the sealer basically tells us two things. First of all, it means that hydroxyapatite is a natural component of the human skeleton. So both dentin and bone contain calcium hydroxyapatite, and as a result, this sealer is very biocompatible. So the one thing is this biocompatibility that you could tell from this formula. And the second thing you can tell is that this hydroxyapatite will cross-link to the hydroxyapatite, the natural hydroxyapatite that's present in the dentin and in the bone, and you end up actually getting a chemical bond between the set cement and the dentinal wall. And that's where the whole idea of bonded endodontics begins, because this tiny little change in our cements may appear tiny, but it is grand, and it has a large consequences and ramifications, which we're going to talk about in the future tutorials. But this bond has been shown by research, and it does change the game, basically. So I wanted to talk about this formula because oftentimes I'm asked, I've been using bioceramics now for 6 years exclusively at my office, and people always say, well, how did you end up just basically getting on board and using it? And it's always a good question, but instead of having to wait for 10-year follow-up studies, as many people always ask me they would like to see, all you really need to do is you need to understand chemistry. If you understand chemistry, then you can make education